I'd like to welcome podcast and pop culture maven heavyweights, editors, and hosts at The Ringer of shows like Binge Mode and The Rewatchables, Jason Concepcion, Mallory Rubin, and Chris Ryan. Thanks for coming to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I am a big fan. We are big fans. You guys are so fantastic to watch and to listen to. But my first question before we get into Game of Thrones and the NBA and all these fun topics is, how do you have enough time to watch all of this television, report on it, keep up on it, make these videos, make these podcasts, and then also have families and cats?
There's always time for a pet. There's always time to love an animal. We drink a lot of coffee and none of us sleep very much or have much going on outside of work.
I'm lucky that like my wife actually does like all the television that I watch, so it just winds up becoming like a thing we do at home.
Okay.
I would be honest and say that I do a lot of starting of shows. Like I check shows out to see if they're good, to see if I should keep going with them, to see if they're going to be part of the conversation. But there's a lot. I mean, like there's so much more that I've missed than I've seen even now.
Same. I don't sleep a lot, and then if I'm not captured by a show in the first 2 episodes, I'm out.
Yeah, I think part of it is just we have to kind of tailor our consumption to whatever we're working on at the moment. So for The Watch, Chris's podcast, he has a responsibility to tell his audience everything about what might be interesting in a given moment. For Binge Mode, we're saying we're focusing on one thing and going all in. So we're just going to rewatch Game of Thrones obsessively or reread Harry Potter obsessively. So we sort of tweak it based on the needs of the moment.
And these are some very successful shows and pods. Binge Mode is one of Time Magazine's 10 best podcasts 2 years in a row. Congratulations.
Thanks, man.
Let's see. The Rewatchables is about movies that have been out for a while.
Sure is.
Of course, The Watch is about Game of Thrones. There's a Twitter show After the Thrones.
Yeah.
I mean, these are a lot of really successful shows, and you're not just pod people. You also don't have faces just for radio. You've got faces for YouTube.
Yeah. I don't know what faces for YouTube is. That a compliment? I don't know.
I think it is.
Probably depends on what quality you're
Have you seen YouTube? There's some
streaming
really
at.
good looking
Yeah.
people on YouTube.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
No, but before we get into Game of Thrones and some of your pods, you're a part of the Ringer network, which is, it's articles, it's videos, it's pods. I'd love to hear the origin story about it because the Ringer is, it's a formidable force.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Mallory and I were editors at Grantland. Jason was a writer at Grantland. And then when Bill left Grantland after a while,
Bill Simmons
left Grantland and left ESPN, he asked a couple of us if we would be interested in doing another project together and trying to start something from the ground up. And that was probably like one of the coolest things anyone could have ever asked us in our professional lives, is like, we can make it however we want to make it. And so we moved into a house in Hollywood and we started, literally like moved into a house.
Us and a whiteboard.
Yeah, and started like writing down really terrible names for companies and crossing them all out. And then
Some of the names were good.
Yeah, I know. And then we decided that what we really wanted to do was have something that was never overly dependent on one plank of the company. So you were basically able to have an editorial site, a podcast network, and video. And then Bill was also at the time doing what would be a weekly show with HBO any given Wednesday. And that was sort of the original idea. And it's gone through a bunch of different permutations. And the podcast network has grown, I think, more exponentially than even we could have possibly dreamed. But that is still the process. Like, you basically have all these different buckets to put all your different ideas in.
And you're still in this house?
No. We moved into a studio in Hollywood.
This sounds like the beginning of Silicon Valley. I was expecting you to call it the Pied Piper.
No,
bunk beds, everyone
That's
lives
right. That was the vibe.
No sign of Ehrlich at any point.
And you had an investment from HBO too, which was it's a big deal.
Yeah,
right?
it was great. I mean, I can't speak for Bill or anything, but I think what was cool about the investment personally was like, that's a company I really respect, and it's a company that does things and makes things that I really respect and does things in the right way. And I think that was even more so than like the relationship financially that we may have had with them. It was more about like, that's the kind of stuff we want to do, is like really consider our ideas and put really good stuff into the world.
I think at the most fundamental level, the editorial DNA of the company is like, let's make stuff that we believe in, expert but approachable, and the company is built on obsession and passion. And so when you see a relationship develop like that, it reinforces that notion is valid and something other people want.
Not that long ago, I don't think anyone would have really considered hosting podcasts about the NFL, betting on the NFL, recaps of shows about dragons and White Walkers, and I seem to let's see. I think that I credit Bill Simmons for helping to start this trend, to sort of introducing me and others to sports through the lens of pop culture. Was this just an obvious step to marry these two? Would you ever thought this would have happened? just a few years ago?
It does feel like an obvious step because it feels like there's, like pop culture is like a singularity. The things that people are interested in, there's less barriers between the different genres of things. If you like the NFL, if you like NBA, and you like something else, you're going to want to talk about those things with similar.
You host a show about
language.
the NBA and a show about TV and movies and Game of Thrones. I don't think that would have happened just a few years ago.
I didn't think so either, and yet here we are. But it feels very natural because
not to kiss the ring either, but like what these guys do, what I do, like a lot of it like you can find in Bill's columns in like the early 2000s.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Like if you read Bill's columns, the way he gamifies pop culture or the way he takes pop culture to explain sports,
Yes.
winds up being like the DNA for a lot of the way I mean not even what we do, but honestly like the way we think about stuff, which is like kind of amazing when you kind of consider that. But it really isn't a lot of like. His architecture is still pretty much what this is built on.
Yeah.
And there's obviously a demand. I mean, you're not just making these to throw in the trash can. The people are responding to this.
Hopefully, yeah. That's the goal.
I mean, you guys spent an hour breaking down the Game of Thrones trailer for the final season. An
Yes.
hour in video.
Yes.
for a 60-minute trailer, it was actually a 90-minute
Second,
shoot
yeah.
that they cut a half hour out of. So we actually did go longer than that.
Could have gone
Yeah.
forever, man.
It could have gone for a
No,
long
it was compelling. I mean, that's my point. Like, there's clearly like an appetite for this.
Yeah, I think again, it's that idea of obsession and passion. Like, I think people. This sounds very obvious, but I think people can tell if you sincerely are interested in what you're talking about, right? It's like it's kind of hard to fake enthusiasm. And one of the most rewarding parts for all of us and for all of our colleagues about starting the Ringer and watching it grow and thrive is seeing people respond to that passion, because other people in the world are passionate about the things they love too. And with sports and culture is increasingly becoming like sports in the sense that you can say, I'm an NBA fan, I'm a TV fan, but as monoculture fades and everybody is watching different things, it's almost like, who's your sports team? Well, what's your TV show at the moment? And the way people talk about and consume these things has become similar. And so the through line really is just, do you love a thing?
Sure. I mean, it's a different platform altogether, but Bleacher Report has this animated series, Game of Zones, right, where they're combining NBA players into these, motifs and tropes from the Thrones.
Yeah.
And it works. I'm in. I watch. I'm a fan of both.
Yeah.
Religiously.
Yeah, it's a Big Ten. Like you can do all sorts of different stuff, and like you really just need the jumping off point of something like Game of Thrones or something like the NBA to like just take your imagination. That's what Jason does with desktop. That's what these guys do with Binge Mode. They just use something as a jumping off point. If you actually listen to Binge Mode, they talk about so many different ideas with Game of Thrones as the platform. It's really cool.
Have you ever listened to Binge Mode?
Oh yeah, I love it.
That's actually a good question. Do you listen to each other and watch each other's shows? Do you have the time?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's kind of like our job, really, is
Yeah.
to like understand what the rest of the company is doing, what
Yeah.
the rest of our colleagues are doing.
I never listen to myself though.
I love to listen to Chris on the Watch. Also, we're very fortunate to do Talk the Thrones together and to get to make something together. And so, part of it is just like the practical professionalism of it. It's like if Chris is talking about Game of Thrones on the Watch and we're talking about Game of Thrones on Binge Mode and Jason's talking about Game of Thrones and Ask the Maester and we're all talking about Game of Thrones together on Talk the Thrones, how are those things different? What's the unique identity of each of them? And so there's an obligation there, but also it's a joy. It's a joy to listen to each other and to read each other and see what everyone's making every day.
Ask the Maester was, I think, my go-to sort of synopsis. A blog after every episode.
Thanks, we appreciate it.
No. So podcasts. I mean, there's the appetite still seems to be growing. Do you think so?
Yeah,
I mean,
in so many different ways.
Is it just going to continue? Like people have this appetite for 60-minute episodes while they're jogging or driving? I mean, is it going to change in any way?
I think that the changes we've seen in podcasts in the space in the last year with more narrative podcasts really coming to the fore is just really amazing. And this is stuff that I honestly never would have thought you'd see happen, where you're like backdooring movie projects via podcasts. Yeah. Pretty incredible. I have no idea where it could go next. It really does seem to be growing at a pace that's kind of hard to fathom.
Do you have a narrative podcast in the works?
It's a true crime pod about a guy who dies while watching Game of Thrones. I guess.
Is it
killed
Matthew
by his
McConaughey?
for the moment.
Yeah.
I think, is it Matthew McConaughey or someone like that?
Yeah, I think so.
No, but to your point, some of these
Chris
podcasts.
plays the Night King.
Yeah, right. If we find out it was me.
Well, because a lot of these narrative podcasts actually have bigger stars in them than when they transfer over into TV.
Yeah, yeah. No, the whole homecoming thing was really wild. I mean, I think that there's that. I think we've been finding a lot of response to doing basically like emergency podcasts. Like when something really massive happens in the culture, that would usually be 5 years ago at Grantland, that would be let's write 5 pieces, and we still do try to cover that on the site really well. But if Kyrie Irving demands a trade, or if Anthony Davis demands a trade, or Game of Thrones trailer comes out, or Triple Frontier comes out, we're like, why don't we just gather the 3 people we know want to talk about this and get this up as fast as possible?
Right.
And we actually have the reps now to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with podcasting, we try to think about everything as a multi-platform execution at The Ringer, but for podcasting in particular, when you think about growth in the future, it's like, why do people like podcasts? Well, there's an intimacy there, and so much about the digital age, I think, can be very alienating for people. You feel a lot of distance and a lot of separation, and with podcasts, like the thing that we all hear that's, I think, so surreal and really meaningful to us is like, it feels like you're just hanging with your friends. Like your friends are in your earbuds, they're in your car with you, they're on that jog with you, and that won't go away, hopefully.
Yeah, so let's get to Game of Thrones.
Sure.
Let's do it.
You guys are experts. You have a relationship to home box office. Is that HBO? That's
It is. I think they're still the home box office, yeah.
So many questions, like who is going to sit on the thrones? There's like, well, you know what? Let me back up. What is it about this show that has captivated you, captivated me, captivated everyone in this room? What is it about Game of Thrones?
Well, I think initially the themes of family and dynastic politics, I think, really explained a lot about the world we live in through a fantasy lens, which, some of the most popular stories in the world, the entire world, are fantasy stories because they kind of flatten culture in a way that allows people to see the places they live, the people they know in that story, even if it's a story that originates in another country somewhere else. So, I just think it has all of that DNA of a really classic, legendary story, which is kind of outcasts looking for their place in the world, trying to find out where they fit, trying to find how to apply their agency into a world that won't let them be what they want to. Orphan children who grow up to be great kings, all those kind of classic elements of a classic fantasy tale are in this story, but in a really hyper-violent way that feels more modern than, say, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it is Lord of the Rings, meets The Walking Dead in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I hadn't read the books, and when I remember those first early seasons just being like, this is kind of like what I always wanted these stories to be. I always wanted it to be like, if you ride into battle, you might die.
Right.
Like the guy who you think might be the leader might not make it. And the 2 people who you wish were together, there might be something really fundamentally that's stopping them from doing that. Yeah. And that's really what I responded to. I was always like, this is always what I wanted.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
And the world building, too, I think, is a thing that takes it to another level of immersion. It's like when you watch Lord of the Rings, what is the economy of Gondor?
Yeah, right.
You're not really sure. But with Game of Thrones, like, you could say, okay, the Reach, they produce a lot of the food for the continent, and they ship it here, and then the North does this, and then Dorne produces this. So you can really understand how all these areas work together.
And how expensive it is to run the kinds of
yes.
wars that these people are running.
Yeah. And the brothels.
And it makes it feel extremely real and relatable to the world we live in.
There's a lot of consequence. I mean, and I don't know if this show invented it, but it was, you know, for monoculture, it was, you know, like the Red Wedding, for example, and Ned Stark, you know, things that I didn't expect to see in a show like that. You expected him to be the hero forever.
How many, there's like 3 or 4 heroes of the show.
Sure.
It's like, oh, I guess, nope.
You know, and it created that whole, you know, the reaction videos of the Red Wedding.
For sure.
That was a, you know, a movement. Are there any particular storylines that you're really looking forward to seeing get tied up in a bow, where you're like, how's this going to end for this person?
I mean, all of them. You know, we're doing this 2-month series on The Ringer called Loose Ends, where every day we're exploring a new loose end like that, you know, the show, people have invested so much time in the story, and I don't say that like to indicate it's a burden. It's been an absolute joy to share the story with all these other people who love it, but you do come to think and feel about the characters as though they are actual people in your life. Like, I find myself sometimes talking about John as though he were a person I knew in the world. And then I kind of have to pull back, but like, I don't really want to pull back because that's what makes it so special.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm personally, I think, most invested in John's arc at this point. And how, with John in particular, that idea, what made Thrones so unique about subverting expectations, can kind of reconcile with the kind of classic hero's journey. Where do those meet? Can they meet?
Yeah.
What happens to him if they don't? And we were talking about this yesterday at our Talk the Thrones event here, but I think we're all very invested in Arya and Sansa, Bran, Tyrion, really all of them.
Yeah.
I'm actually pretty curious about characters like Bran and Melisandre, because those are the ones that I don't feel like I completely understand what they're capable of, and that makes this season really exciting. Like if Melisandre comes back and Bran, whatever Bran is becoming, that's the stuff I still have to wrap my head around. I kind of got like the kings and the queens and like where we're the whites and like all that, but I don't quite get like
the fantasy elements.
Yeah, and all, but in a way where I'm like, this is the only like power move they have left is like whatever these people are capable of, kind of.
Yeah.
Are there any in particular like weird storylines? Like the Podrick storyline to me?
Sex got done? What's not to get?
I'm waiting for them to bring that one back.
Big loose end there.
Yeah.
Big indeed.
Yeah.
So who is going to sit on the throne?
Oh man, I have no idea. I don't
think that. I increasingly think there will not be a throne at the end.
I agree with that.
Sort of where I'm going, but again, reserve the right to walk that back at any point and change my mind. If Dany's whole notion of breaking the wheel, it's like Chekhov's breaking the wheel at this point. It feels like it either is there because she's going to fail to follow through on that, and that will be the downfall of her character, or it will prove to be reality. And, you know, just like Aegon melted down the swords to forge the throne in the first place, they'll melt it down to unforge this idea of a united kingdom. And like Dany agreed to the pact with Yara about dominion, independence for the Iron Islands, there's no reason that couldn't extend across the land. Now, what that means for Jon and Dany and their potential child, in their little incest baby, should they produce one? Hard to say where they would be.
Yeah, I mean, the North has declared independence twice over the course of this series.
Hasn't gone well.
No.
Hasn't gone well, but it's a harbinger of unrest, you know, within the realm. And then you have Dany in a close relationship with a person who is her nephew, but is also the chosen ruler of this kingdom that sees itself as independent within the realm. I agree with Mal. I think we're looking at revolutionary change in Westeros. It's not going to be status quo.
Jon is the heir to the Iron Throne, and he's not going to want that.
Yeah. Are we out in a white space here, well beyond the books, as far as what the intended ending was going to be? Do you think? Okay, so we had an Entourage of the movie. I just found out today that there's a Deadwood movie coming.
Like a couple months.
Do you think there's going to be a Game of Thrones movie after
all
all
this?
this?
They'll just keep doing it. I think I really do think this is it for this group of people. I think they may eventually come back to maybe right after the Game of Thrones, or maybe they'll do something on the side of Game of Thrones, like of what we know. But I think that Benioff and Weiss and this cast, they're done.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the spinoff is in motion. The one that will take place during the Long Night, though, is TBD whether it will be called the Long Night, despite George R.R. Martin consistently calling it the Long Night. So that's, you know, that'll happen, and presumably will be pretty quick on the heels of this Thrones show ending, I would think. And then, you know, there were other scripts, other pilots for spinoffs in motion. The thing about the world is, you know, even though George has 2 more books to write, everything that's there already, you could make shows and movies and other spinoffs and adaptations off of what he's already done, or just ideas and kernels that are out there until the end of time, and you still wouldn't touch it all.
There's vast tracts of the known world, as they call it, that have not been explored at all. Islands and other parts of the continent, the Far East. There's a lot of space there.
So agree with Chris that this particular story will conclude, but I think we'll live in that universe for a long time.
What so badly do you want to be the ending? If you could, what would satisfy you so you don't go to bed upset?
I'm very mixed about this. We talked about this yesterday at our event, and I was like, in some ways, the thing that I want is for it to remain consistent with the world it's built, which would mean a lot of things that I don't want to have to happen.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I really do think that Jon or Dany has to die for this show to end, and that's really sad.
Yeah,
that sucks.
sadly, yes.
Those crazy kids deserve it. You know? Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really sad.
So it's like, I think that Jamie was gonna die. I don't want that to happen, but like I think that these things are kind of been set in motion.
Yeah.
We're unfortunately out of time. I really wanted to get to the NBA,
But it's always going to be there.
It's always going to be there.
I was like, but I want to make sure that people know that you're recording a podcast, which is essentially a session
this
here
afternoon.
at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
And what's it about?
We do a podcast called The Rewatchables, where we talk about basically the most rewatchable movies. And today we're doing a live show talking about The Matrix. It's Jason, myself, Sean Fennessy, and Shea Serrano.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
We can expect to listen to that.
It'll go up at some point on the Rewatchables field, I imagine. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. So if KD and Harden and Russ had stayed together, that's the question I'll have to ask you
man,
when
can
we
you
go
imagine?
off the air.
I think
Fun
somewhere in
alternate
California,
history.
Bill Simmons just woke up and said, "Is somebody talking about the Harden trade?"
Harden trade.
All right, guys, thank you so much for
Thanks so
being
much for
here.
having
us. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mallory, Jason, and Chris for stopping by the studio today, and thank you out there for watching. Please continue to tune in for more live streaming interviews later today on southbysouthwest.com/live.